Hi everyone, welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Jodi Lyons, and I am thrilled to be here today with our guest and my friend, Ting Shih. Ting is the CEO of ClickMedix and also the founder of a brand new project called CareBrains. So Ting, I am thrilled you're here. And I would love to hear the origin of, first of all, ClickMedix, and then second of all, why you and I are doing CareBrains.
Yeah.
So please go ahead and tell us the story.
Absolutely. About 10 years ago, I was a graduate student at MIT. We had a class project with a very simply described project assignment, which was to create a business that would impact over 1 billion people.
1 billion people?
A billion
Oh,
people.
that's simple, but okay.
Simply phrased, yes. So back then, turning back 10 years, we didn't have iPhone, we didn't have Androids, but I was passionate about healthcare and I knew everyone had access to a mobile phone.
Okay.
So we started doing essentially what's now called telemedicine or telehealth with mobile phones. And we started with one of the hardest reach areas in Botswana and other sub-Saharan Africa countries and expanded now to 24 countries.
Wow.
And what I do is essentially, in order to impact over 1 billion people, there's no way you can hire fast enough, probably not in my lifetime, to get enough people to take care of patients everywhere in the world, or get them to sign up for a service where you could have telehealth and enable a remote consultation to happen. So what we did is we found the best of the doctors, we found the best of the health organizations that are already working with local communities, already taking care of them, but they didn't have all the expertise that's available to them. So we essentially remoted that expertise and enable that teleconsult, and at the same time trains the local health organizations on these specific issues. Could be diabetes, heart disease, so on and so forth. So what I always do is find an expert in the topic and scale what that person is doing so that knowledge and service can be available to everyone in the world.
That is fascinating. And I have to tell everybody that Ting is a multi-award winner, entrepreneur, and health IT specialist. So I am triply honored to be part of her team. And so let's talk a little bit about what CareBrains is and where it came from.
So since I met you, about 7 years ago at least, I've always thought you are such an expert in caring for people, especially with dementia, almost getting to the psyche of that dementia patient and a whole variety of disease symptoms. And if everybody could have a Jodi, they would be saved and they would know what to do with dementia and how to care for that. And all the conflicts and problems that comes from not just for the patient and the caregivers. And on top of that, how to pay for it and how to sort it out. How do you figure out what you don't know? What you don't know, you don't know.
Right, right.
And so I thought working with you would be able to scale your expertise, and that way everyone can have a Jodi to guide them through a very difficult time in the dementia journey.
Well, I love that. And I think we've had a lot of fun starting up CareBrains. And what I found really interesting from the process is what kinds of questions we've been getting from all sorts of places I didn't expect to be getting questions.
Which is surprising because what's surprising to me is that you're also surprised by some of these questions. For me, it's all new. Caregiver stress, not to be underestimated.
Yeah.
I think what's so fascinating that you do that I haven't seen others do is how to pay for it, creative ways of paying for it.
True.
Insurance, financial advisors, I didn't know lawyers needed to be involved. It was just so fascinating to understand that it's everybody, all hands on deck. You need the doctor, you need the lawyers, you need the financial advisors, you need the home caregivers, you need all the specialists. It's just absolutely fascinating and challenging at the same time.
It is, but what I like that you were able to do, even though I admit you dragged me kicking and screaming, I liked that you were able to create an algorithm out of my brain.
Oh yeah, that was so much fun.
Fun for you.
Well, I live off of if then I was in decision trees. I dream in that. So So that was a fun part for me, but what's so amazing is that we're able to extract your brain into something the artificial intelligence can then take on and replicate infinitely, which is so exciting.
That to me is really exciting because, again, while I understood the depth and breadth of the different types of dementia and how big the population is and how it affects the caregivers, I, as an individual or even as a small company, wasn't able to scale it in the way you can. And I think what a lot of people don't really understand is each person with dementia has probably 2 or 3 caregivers. One of those caregivers is usually a spouse who can also be elderly, or in the cases of like frontotemporal dementia or young onset Alzheimer's, is still trying to work. They're in their prime working years and then have a spouse they need to take care of. But your technologies allowed us to scale to actually meet the needs of all of those people. And I find that totally fascinating, the combination of subject matter experts and also the technology. So I'm grateful we were able to start that program.
Exactly.
And what I was thinking is perhaps you and I could go through some of those questions that surprised me. They've been coming in through our website, which is CareBrains.com, but also through social media. There's been a really large population of people who are on things like Facebook, Twitter, etc., and they're caregivers trying to work together. And they're trying to help each other out. And what I'm glad we're able to do now is to actually be those experts who are in those groups to actually give real advice.
Yep.
So my question for you is, out of the questions we've seen so far, do you have one that stands out to you as like the most common that we're receiving?
I'd say a common theme that I see is just caregiver confusion. And what's heartbreaking for me is you see all these groups of people just throwing questions at each other with no correct answers, with no definitive, here's what you should do. It's almost, just everyone, it's a group of very confused and potentially more confused. But I think the support aspect there is amazing. I think the common question is really about dementia itself, is, why is mom doing this? Why is mom doing that? Am I doing the right thing? What should I be expecting? And I think, having worked with hundreds of diseases in the past decade, every disease is different. With dementia, they're very, and as you know, you're the expert in this, there are so many different kinds of dementia, and it changes.
Yes.
And the other thing I realized is a lot of these questions, they didn't get a diagnosis yet.
That's true.
Which makes it really difficult if you don't know what type of dementia. How are you going to expect the progression of the disease? Because it is a disease, it's not a state of mind, it's not, it's just temporary because, we see moms slipping cognitively temporarily, so it's temporary. It's not, it's going to progress. And sadly, dementia runs in my family. Grandparents, aunt, it's something that I need to care about. I think a lot of people encounter it, and I just haven't seen answers like the ones I've heard from you.
Well, it's interesting. So thank you for your compliments. But it is. I think you and I find the same things heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking that there are people out there trying to navigate this with no support, no expertise, and they're trying to help each other as best they can. But very often there's a lot of bad information. Dr. Internet's not really a reliable source. And so one of the things I always think is most important is if the caregiver or the person with suspected dementia thinks that something is wrong, something's wrong. It's very, very simple. If you think there is a problem, there is a problem and you need to look into it. And there's a big reluctance. There's still somewhat of a social stigma, which there shouldn't be. I mean, nobody would say to you, you have a broken leg, get up and walk.
Yeah.
They would say, oh, the leg is broken. Let's look at it, and we'll take an x-ray, and we'll put a cast or a brace or an ACE bandage, and we'd go through physical therapy, and there would be no stigma. It would just be the leg is broken. When the brain is dying, there's more of a stigma, and people hesitate to ask the questions. So my real wish was that if everybody who thought there was a problem went and got screened for whatever kind of cognitive impairment it was, then I think life would be better. You know, name the problem. Let's find out what we're dealing with, and then we can plan accordingly. And you're right, there's a bunch of different kinds of dementia, and people don't even understand that dementia is not a disease. Dementia is a cluster of symptoms. It's an umbrella term. And I know you and I have spent a lot of time identifying the different diseases, going through what are the diseases of dementia, identifying symptoms, trying to help our clients understand the different patterns of the disease, the different life expectancies, the different costs, etc. And so for everybody out there, let me give you one PSA. If you think there's a problem, then you need to look at it. You need to go get screened. There are companies like our colleague, Dr. Mansbach. Full disclosure, I co-authored Brain Health as You Age with Dr. Bill Mansbach and Dr. Steve Simmons. But if you go Google Dr. Bill Mansbach and you look on his website, you can see that there's virtual visit screenings. Or people can go into their primary care physician's office, or a neurologist, or a neuropsychologist, or a psychiatrist, and get screened, get an identification of there is a problem, and then start moving down the road to what exactly is the problem. Now, I can see we're getting ready to go to a break, but when we come back, I think we should continue talking about some of the most common questions we've had, perhaps even some of the miracle, how do you pay for things, if you don't mind. And I know with your MBA, that's also your bailiwick, so I hope we could talk about that. So for everybody, we are about to head to break. This has been Your Need to Know, and we will be back in just a few minutes.
Let me tell you about the toughest guy on earth. He does the work of 2 jobs, but only gets paid for one. He's tough enough to feed the man that gave him a lifetime of nourishment. He has the crazy strength to lift the man that raised him up without even flinching. That's right. No Employee of the Month bonus check here. This guy, no, this warrior, will always be by his father's side, even if his dad will hardly remember. Good luck finding a gym to train for that. If this guy isn't the toughest guy on the planet, then I don't know who is. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help. You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right.
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home. I blew on him.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Jodi Lyons, and with me again is my friend and colleague, Ting Shih, and we're discussing dementia, our new company, CareBrains, and before we went to break, we alluded to a big question that we've been getting, which is how do we pay for care? A lot of our clients and a lot of people on the internet say, how do I pay for care for my loved one? So Ting, I'm turning to you and I'm going to throw the question right back at you. Can you tell me a little bit about ways that someone could pay for care?
I think as far as financing goes, it goes back to, do you know what the dementia or what type of dementia it is? If it's one that progresses quickly, then you're looking at potentially 3 to 5 years of care that's needed. Mm-hmm. If it's a slow progressing dementia, then maybe you're planning for 10 years. Just like anytime you're planning your finances, you have to budget for, let's say you have a retirement fund, can it afford 3 to 5 years? Great, well for that 3 to 5 years, wouldn't you want to live gloriously in a palace-like environment or take a vacation or, that's what you can do in 3 to 5 years. But if it's 10 years, then you probably would slow down your spending, find other ways to increase that asset, investment or whatnot. A 10-year plan would certainly be very different than a short-term plan. So I think what I've been seeing is a lot of times people start planning for it without knowing the dementia, how it would progress, and how to budget for it that length of time.
Well, that's a really good point. So the first thing is you need to know what it is you're planning for. And to do that, you need to have a real diagnosis of what type of dementia and the expected length of the disease and the progression of the disease. That's what a lot of people don't know. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, there are changes in the brain 20 years before somebody starts to show symptoms.
Wow.
One of the things I've seen is that people also don't understand the actual cost of care. So there are federal average numbers. Those numbers have nothing to do when you live in a major metropolitan area. So I tell people they should be looking at $10,000 to $12,000 a month, perhaps even $15,000 a month for their care. And some major metropolitan areas, it can be as high as $20,000 a month.
Can you drill down a bit on what's the care that would be, let's just say, metropolitan DC area? What is the care you're referring to that would be $10,000 to $12,000?
That's a great question. So people always assume staying at home is cheaper. It's not always. If the person needs 24-hour supervision, it's not always cheaper. But let's say you're looking at home care, where you need an aide to take care of cooking and cleaning and helping the person shower safely and helping them get dressed safely and helping them, in general, have some social aspects, etc. Well, that can absolutely run $6,000 a month or more, plus your household expenses. And then if you start looking at assisted living, it can be $8,000 to $10,000 a month, and that would be when you're living in a community and they're providing room and board and meals and social activities and things like that. Then you move to memory care. Well, memory care can be between $10,000 and $15,000 a month. Well, what's the difference between memory care and assisted living? Memory care is a higher level of care, higher staff ratio, and a secure unit so the person can't wander. Those costs are just higher. And then if you were to get into skilled nursing like long-term care, sometimes it can be $12,000 to $15,000 a month. And again, there's wiggle room, but that's generally what the cost of care are for most major metropolitan areas. Now extrapolate that out to your point, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 15 years, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. How would you, let's say hypothetically, would you plan, let's say person is earlier in the dementia progression and it's kind of slow moving, more like a 10-year duration, would you then do home? And then if the disease gets worse, then you would consider assisted living and then maybe memory care? Is there a tier of services that you would time gauge?
That's a great question. So yes, there is a tier. You can do a step system. Some places actually you can buy in and do a deposit in a life care community and then progress within their community. Other places don't have the buy-in. You can just progress within their community. But here's the biggest factor for making that decision. And this is the biggest heartbreaking factor because I can't quantify it. It's not math. It's caregiver stress.
Yeah.
And so Medicare tried to quantify that. And Medicare determined a few years ago that if you had two people, one was a person with dementia, in that case they were studying Alzheimer's, person with Alzheimer's disease, and their caregiver was a spouse or one of their peers who was also a Medicare beneficiary, that caregiver cost Medicare $13,000 a year more in medical expenses than for a caregiver of other diseases, including things like congestive heart failure, kidney disease, diabetes, etc. So again, it was those caregivers were physically making themselves sick caring for the person with Alzheimer's. So how do we quantify that for real to say, is home the best? Is assisted living the best? Is keeping the couple together the best? Do we separate them? It's complicated, which is again why we always say you want a really good care manager walking you through it, but we have to put a number on caregiver stress and find a way to make that equally as important as how many dollars we're spending.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And can you tell me more about long-term insurance? We've heard a lot of questions on why, can it help pay for dementia expenses? Let's just put it simply.
Okay, super question. So long-term care insurance was a very different animal 15 years ago. It used to be nursing home insurance and it paid for nursing homes. And then the consumers decided that they wanted to not stay in a nursing home, so could they get insurance to not have to live in a nursing home? And then over the past 7, 8 years or so, the industry's really consolidated. There used to be over 100 providers, and now there's fewer than a dozen of long-term care insurance. So they created now a new hybrid product, which is long-term care insurance, life insurance hybrid, and a financial advisor can go into all the details about it. But the reality is there are annuities, long-term care insurance, life insurance, and other financial tools that you can use to plan in advance so that you can pay for your care. What we're finding also is that a lot of people have the majority of their assets tied up in their house. And so very often they can do something like get a bridge loan on their house and use that bridge loan to pay for their care during the transition of when they're trying to sell the house and they need to move in. Because as you and I both know with family members in real estate, it is really hard to sell the house with the people still living in it.
Right.
Particularly if you have somebody who needs medical equipment, or you've had to use the living room where the hospital bed is, or commodes in the living room instead of in the bathroom, or a person with dementia who gets very disturbed having to leave their house so somebody could do a showing. So there's a ton of different financial tools, and honestly that's why we work so closely with so many financial advisors and attorneys, which is we want to make sure that the attorneys and financial advisors know what they're planning for. I've had clients who are multimillionaires and I've had to look at them and say, you've got to figure out how you're going to plan because you're blowing through your money too quickly.
Right.
And so, that's one of the hard parts is quantifying what we can quantify, understanding what we can't, and then educating the professionals. Did that answer the question?
Absolutely. And I remember one of the financial advisor trainings that I saw, they were estimating the cost of living was half of what it is in a metropolitan area. I mean, if you look at housing prices alone, that's not going to stay. It increases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was at one of the presentations where I remember standing on the stage giving the presentation and trying very hard not to crack up at the audience because I thought it would be unprofessional. But their number had been $4,000 a month for memory care.
Right.
And I said, where'd you guys get the number? Well, it was a federal average. And then one of the other people in the audience screeched out, I live in Los Angeles. You can't park your car for $4,000 a year. So it's hard, and it's a real number. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to go back to one of the questions you asked, which was, and staying at home, and is there stepped care? The answer is, we want people to stay in a safe, loving, comfortable environment, which becomes their home, regardless of where that home is. So is it the home they grew up in, the home they raised their kids in? Maybe. Is it a different home because it's a senior housing or assisted living or memory care? Maybe. Is it a nursing home? Maybe. But there are a lot of factors involved, and we have to make sure that people understand that the word home can apply to a whole lot of different places. But, we don't believe in ripping people out of their homes right away the second they have some cognitive impairment. And I think that fear of that happening is one of the reasons that they don't say anything.
Right, yeah, I've seen that in a lot of the questions that come in. Caregiver guilt, mom is not starting to remember me. Should I still be doing these? I'm so tired. And should we just send her to a home and feeling guilty about it, assisted living and feeling guilty about it?
Exactly. And, I can see we're out of time, but I'm going to close with this, which is, when people say, I promised Dad I'd never put Mom away, first of all, we're not putting Mom away. We're choosing safe environments. And second of all, when the situation changes and you gain more information, that's when you change your decision. You need to process new information and then make those decisions. And there should not be any guilt as long as you're doing what is best for your family member. There's no need to feel guilty. It may be different and it may look different to what you thought it would be, but you shouldn't feel guilty about it. And so now I know we're out of time. And Ting, thank you so much for being here. It's been great being with you. Everyone, thank you for joining us on Your Need to Know.